Hello everybody and welcome to this presentation that I prepared for YouTube. This is a presentation that follows my talk about Israel on October 7, which I've prepared for the Palmetto Forum in Colombia on January 29. I'm going to specifically talk about the impact of October 7, obviously only selected elements thereof. I will talk about two ethnographic experiences in New York City and Israel over the course of October 2023 until October 2024. And then in conclusion, I will talk about some lessons that I've learned and the context of those lessons. The background of this research is my research interest in the policing of terrorism, which I specifically have conducted since September 11 of 2001 for rather obvious reasons, and that also led to my first research visit in Israel in 2004, funded through the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Then since that time, I noticed that there was a decline in interest in counterterrorism, and there was also a decline of concern for anti-Semitism. Then an obvious turning point were the events of October 7, 2023, and that then led to my second research visit in Israel in October of 2024, which was funded through the Walker Institute. The first part of my ethnographic experience took place in New York City because I privately reside in the Morningside Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, very close to Columbia University, which for rather obvious reasons has been at the center of some attention. I have also taken part in certain specific activism events, the Bring Them Home Now marches, the Nova Music Festival exhibitions, the Jerusalem Post Conference, the Israel Day Parade, a conference that was organized by Shurat Hadin. The first thing that I noticed was very shortly after October 7, on October 11 in New York City, the display of a small Israeli flag in a restaurant in New York City. And what I noticed was that so soon after the horrible atrocities committed by Hamas, there was already a particular notion that it would take some act of courage to show sympathy for the nation of Israel, which struck me as very, very strange. Then I noticed that there were marches going on in Central Park in support of the hostages. And I didn't quite know at the time what that was, but it actually turned out that these marches are organized every Sunday. The next thing that I noticed were the posters to show sympathy for the hostages that were kidnapped by Hamas. And I also noticed that very soon, like here in December, some of those posters were already being vandalized by Hamas supporters. Another thing very closely related to that was that by late 2023, early 2024, the campus of Columbia University was already being fortified. The marches on Sundays were taking place, and I actually began to attend some of these marches. As you can see here, by February 2024, I was already openly displaying my sympathy for the hostages and for the broader cause of Israel. I then attended some other events. The opposition to the Jewish community was not quite as severe at this point. Nonetheless, I already thought it was necessary to show my sympathy to the Jewish students at Columbia University, as well as to one of its professors, which you can see here. This was the first time that I met Shai Davidai, who in the meantime has become a very well-known activist. Next up, I could continue to see various posters being vandalized, and various other stickers being displayed on this issue. Then, by chance, one day early morning, I saw somebody who looked familiar to me and took these pictures of this person freely walking into the campus of Columbia University, particularly at Knox Hall. And indeed, this was a Mohammed Abdu, then a visiting professor at Columbia University, who had just been the subject of the Senate hearing when the then president of Columbia University said that this person was no longer allowed on campus. And obviously, he was allowed on campus, and these pictures got quite a lot of attention on X, I was happy to see. At Columbia University, the voices in favor of terrorism were getting louder and louder and more openly. Of course, this also solicited quite a response, such as the organization of the End Jew Hatred campaign by Michel Ardoux, who I met at this particular time at Columbia campus, which became more and more fortified. This issue then also got a lot of attention from the media, as you can see here. Alongside of this, there was an increasing presence of police, as well as signs being posted on the street, such as here, a sign that says Zionism is terrorism, which is not true, and I therefore removed this sign. in the interest of truth, this sign had to be removed. Then, to my astonishment, I saw this particular gentleman who was bravely putting up signs, which I thought was rather remarkable. I also felt the need to show him my sympathy just for doing this, which is painful for me to have to say this. I also attended several more of the marches which have been taking place every Sunday, and as you can see, there is even appropriate security just to make sure that people could voice their opinions in peace. I also attended the Nova exhibition, which was a very well organized exhibition that showed what it was like for the attendants of this music festival to be the victims of the Hamas terrorist attacks. Then I attended the annual conference of the Jerusalem Post, which devoted a lot of attention to campus activism and to the open display of anti-Semitism on the college campus of Columbia and so many other universities. Next up, I attended the Jerusalem Day Parade, a very lively, joyful event that took place in June 2024. The sticker campaign continued on. This is a sticker that I placed right at the sociology department of Columbia University. That is the picture that you see to the left. It is a sticker of an American who is held captive by Hamas, and as you can see on the picture to the right side, the very next day it was already removed. We continued on with the marches at which representatives and family members of the hostages have been speaking. At Columbia University over the summer, there was a brief period when there was no longer security, and so that was the one time that I finally could go back onto the campus, which ordinarily is available to the public, but which hasn't been over the past year. And as we can see here, the encampment had caused a lot of damage, but this entire lawn had been renewed. However, as soon as the school year started in August, there was again protest. This was on the move-in day at Barnard College, and this was then what was going on at that particular time. And so that is the situation at Columbia University. Until today, there is security, like you see here. So I cannot go in, but I can go across the street from the main entrance, and there is a store that sells Israeli products. On purpose, they are separately displayed. The marches have been going on. Some of these marches have been attended by family members of the hostages. As you can see here, these are the father and mother of one of the hostages, and they spoke to us, and they were extremely critical of Netanyahu and extremely critical of his policies and of the war. Now, other people who are critical of Netanyahu obviously come from a very different ideological side. As you can see here, these pictures, rather strange allies that we have here in opposition to Netanyahu, and this was on the occasion of one of his visits at the United Nations in September of 2024. Then the final conference that I attended on the issue in New York City was the Rage Against the Hate Conference, a Jewish activism conference that was organized by Shurat Hadin, an Israel legal center that represents victims of terrorist attacks. And as you can see, this conference was attended by some of the leading Jewish American spokespeople, as well as by one of the released hostages, Mia Shem. Then we turn to maybe the most interesting part of my ethnographic experience, which was a visit to Israel that I took between October 4 and October 14 of 2024. I was first in Herzliya. Next, I went to Bnei Brak. Then I had a very interesting experience visiting the Gaza envelope. Then I went back to Tel Aviv, and I also visited Jerusalem. My visit began on October 4. I actually had to cancel the flight that I had originally booked because there were missile attacks from Iran going into Israel on October 1. And then I rebooked my flight for October 4, but I was packed but unsure if I could fly until the very day that I was flying, because on a day-by-day basis, flights were being canceled. So I took off, somewhat unsure even at this time if I could actually reach Israel. As you can see here, the flight at some point I noticed seemed to divert more to the south. We were actually going into Dubai. And indeed, the flight went somewhat south, then back up. So in other words, it dipped around Israel. So it is a rather strange to go into a country like this when the plane doesn't even fly over that country. Then in Dubai, we changed planes. That went very smoothly. And then the plane went over to Judea and Samaria area where we could see very clearly the separation barrier. We landed very safely into the airport in Tel Aviv. This was very unproblematic, but I did notice that we were one of the very, very few planes going into Tel Aviv. Then the first thing that I noticed in the airport, and what I continue to notice all throughout my journey, was there was a lot of attention and a lot of displays concerning the hostages. On the right picture, you see the security line for the non-Israeli guests, and as you can see, there were not a lot of people coming into the country, which maybe is not surprising. What was very striking was there was virtually no security. I was let into the country without any problems at all. Somebody gave me a sticker, looked at my passport, and that was it, and I said, sure, no problem, just go on in. One of the first things that I noticed was the display of a menorah, not to my surprise. But then there was also displays for the new picture with Lady Gaga. And this kind of sums up Israel. That is, on the one hand, you see something that you expect, maybe having to do with the hostages and with the war situation. But then on the other hand, it is a very normal, functioning country. And indeed, here you see pictures that I took when I had arrived in Herzliya by the Mediterranean. And the thing that I noticed so much is how normal everything was, how society kept on functioning as if nothing special was going on, when indeed obviously something very special was going on, something very problematic, and at sometimes we would be confronted with that, but at so many times you couldn't see any of that. Here again you see how beautiful it is by the Mediterranean, and just when you think it couldn't be more beautiful, then you can take this picture. So this is a picture I took on the first night that I landed in the country that everybody's talking about, the country that my plane had to divert from, and then you take this wonderful pictures. The next day, again, this normality of Israeli society struck me just walking around, and one of the things that I happened to walk into was a big shopping mall where people were eating, where people were shopping. It was very beautiful, and so the normality of this society really struck me very much. Then I kept on walking. Another thing that I noticed is there was a lot of building going on. It's a society that is flourishing, that is creating, and that is building upwards, not downwards. Here again you see some more pictures of Herzliya. So you see it's very busy. It was an awful lot of cars, much traffic, with a lot of great food, and then also some American imported foods. However, then you're confronted again with those aspects of Israeli society that make it a very different country. And what had happened is, it was on the news suddenly, something had happened, and there was actually a terrorist attack in the bus station in Beersheba. So you see, suddenly you're confronted with a reality that makes Israel very different from most other Western democratic societies. And that juxtaposition, that is something that is very striking. And then I attended the counterterrorism conference at Reichman University, which was very well attended, as you can see. There were about 500 people there. The conference continued on the next day, which was on October 7th. So obviously the conference was deliberately organized on the anniversary of October 7th. And that day there was no television. So it was a very somber moment. And in my hotel also, there were 2 yellow chairs because 2 of the people who worked in the hotel were also victims of October 7th. The conference went on as planned. Then something happened nonetheless. Suddenly all the phones started to beep, and it was because there was a notice of missiles coming in. And so suddenly the lights went on and there was a notice, please remain seated. What had happened was there was a missile attack that had landed in Tel Aviv. And Tel Aviv is very close to Herzliya. So we were in an area that was subject to this danger. Nonetheless, we just carried on. At some point somebody said, well, we are actually in a safe building, but maybe we should take shelter. And then some gentleman said, why should we? Life goes on. In a very life-affirming way, there is the Israeli reaction, life goes on. Then again something happened because the meeting was over, everybody was walking back in, there was no alarm that I could hear. I don't know what it was at this time, but I was rather worried because suddenly everybody said, no, we have to go take shelter. On the phones that were set up in Israel, there was a notice that Herzliya was under attack. So then we took shelter. Now I don't want to make light of the situation of the people living in Israel under these conditions, but ultimately for us, you make the best of it. So as you can see, this is us taking shelter from missiles that are coming in, and we're laughing. So this is how you respond. Then the next day I went to Bnei Brak to visit the offices of Shurat Hadin, which were here in one of these very beautiful office buildings. But Bnei Brak is otherwise also home to a lot of ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. So you see a lot of Orthodox Jewish people. It's a very different kind of environment, particularly for Tel Aviv, which otherwise is a very secular city. Bnei Brak, by the way, is also known to have a Coca-Cola bottling plant. So it is a very interesting environment to visit. And then in the afternoon, I visited more places in Herzliya again. Then something happens. And what I had noticed is that the post on my Twitter account got a lot of views. Sadly, some of those views came from the pro-terrorist side. And as you can see here, when I was visiting Bnei Brak with all this cultural richness, that is when I get a notice from somebody that says that I should get back home to Belgium or America, apparently, that I do not belong in the Middle East. Worse yet, that Bnei Brak itself is a European settler colony. Here you see some of the vile comments that led to. Apparently, I have the face and smile of a satanic 65-year-old woman who just almost ate a baby. So this is the level of opposition that we have. Please tell me she's a Jew. It looks like there's a Muslim who moved the skin from his brain. Oh wait, that's his hair. Mathieu Deflem is an extremist Jewish activist embedded in American academia. Nazi Jews are the worst ugly people in the world. No surprise, he's a Jew. Maybe at this point I can tell you that I am not a Jew, although I would be very happy if I was. But as it happens, I am not. If you wonder if people in Israel know that there is this terrorist support on college campuses in the United States, then the answer is very definitely yes, because as you can see here, these events are being reported on Israeli television. The next day, I visit Herzliya some more, and I have an appointment with some of my colleagues. Here you see Gideon and Aryeh, and we have a lovely dinner. So again, in Israel, people function in their daily lives. Then I had a very, very fortunate experience with my friend Amit, who you see here. Now, Amit, I should tell you, is a survivor of the Nova Music Festival on October 7, and he is also a tour guide. I would warmly encourage you to contact Amit. I will give you his contact details in the description of this video. He can show you around at the Gaza envelope in a very, very useful way. When we drove through Tel Aviv, then what I noticed were these signs. It is very striking, not only that there's a lot of support towards the hostages, what I could also see visibly displayed, there is a lot of opposition in Israel against Netanyahu. Now I know there's probably also a lot of support towards Netanyahu, but it is really striking to see there's a lot of people in Israel who really have a deep contempt against Netanyahu, against his policies, and against the way in which he has been handling the situation since October 7. And the first town that we visited in the Gaza envelope is Sderot. Sderot is a city that was very, very heavily hit on October 7. It's a very beautiful city with a lot of great food. There is great food all over Israel. And so everything again now seems to be functioning normally. And then again, suddenly, I see something that you don't see in other societies. And what you see here is a shelter. So this is one of the shelters that you see all over Israel or in the buildings, but in open areas, the shelters are separate constructions. And what you see to the right is the backside of an apartment. And if you look carefully at the top, you see those two white circles. Those are air vents, and they indicate that the back of those apartment buildings are shelters. So people can take shelter in that room, and that's where they are protected from incoming missiles. Here you see pictures of Sderot. So as you can see, it is a very beautiful community and everything seems to be fine. Then we visited Heroes Hill lookout point. This is very close to the Gaza border, and this is actually a place from which one can see the Gaza border. So at some point this was a military base, and now it is kept as a memorial. And from this particular lookout point, this is a view on Gaza from within Israel, just across the border. And then again, we go into the city and we went to a playground. It looks nice, but it is actually an old sewer, and the sewer has been converted into one of the original shelters. Then we also visited the Shabbat Center of Sderot, and as you can see here, if you look to the picture to the right, you see certain black dots into the white of the building, and that those are actually hits that this center took during October 7, and there is a menorah that is made of the missiles that have been coming in. Next, we visited the police station in Sderot. The police station of Sderot was overtaken by terrorists because the terrorists from Hamas had overtaken the station. The police station itself had to be destroyed, and instead there is now a memorial to commemorate the police officers that died during October 7. Next, we visited a new memorial that was set up near Nahal Oz, and it is a memorial for 16 women officers that were killed during the events of October 7. Next, we took the car down Route 232. This is actually the street where a lot of the Nova Music Festival concert goers were killed, because this is a main route from the northern part of Israel down south, and this is the route where a lot of the terrorists overtook the cars, set cars on fire, killing people at will. And then we went here, and as you can see, if you look on the left side, you can actually see there's a horizon. There's a very close nearby horizon, because it goes uphill a little bit. And as you can see, we cannot see what is on the other side of the horizon because it is a little bit uphill. And this is the exact same view that the Hamas terrorists had, because they came in not knowing what was on the other side. What was on the other side was the Nova Music Festival. And so as you can see, this is why it was an opportunistic act of terrorism terrorism for the Hamas terrorists to kill so many people at the music festival, because suddenly they see these thousands of people, most of them obviously unarmed, many of them peaceniks, many of them in favor of two-state solution, all of them completely unprotected. Here you see some of the commemorations that are now set up. You see a couple and then a woman next to her, and these are actually three friends of Amit. So he lost these three close friends during the Nova festival when the Hamas terrorists came in. Then next up, we visited the burned cars compound near Tukuma. They have collected all the cars from the Nova Music Festival that were either burned or where people died in, now brought together to be commemorated in honor of their memory. Our final part of our visit in the Gaza envelope near Kibbutz Mefalsim. This is the shelter in which the three friends of Amit were killed. They left their car and they were on the run, but the shelters are meant to protect people from missiles. They are not meant to protect people from terrorists. Then we ended with a visit to the Shuva Brothers. This is a small restaurant and grocery store, and this is for the soldiers in the nearby area. And you can also donate to the Shuva Brothers to support their cause, helping the soldiers. I will also give you the contact details for them in the description of this video. Then we went back to Tel Aviv the evening of October 10, and as you can see, people are walking and biking down the street because it is the beginning of Yom Kippur. So suddenly, very, very busy Tel Aviv was a very, very quiet city. And the next day, I took advantage to visit the city. One of the things, of course, that was striking was the constant attention to the hostages and the Bring Them Home Now campaign. This is a Rothschild Street, very beautiful architecture. And as you can see, this is a very normal life in Israel, very peaceful. And then yet again, you see these signs, and then in the background, you have another sign that is in support of the IDF in this particular case. Don't panic, the IDF is taking care of us. So it's always this very peculiar juxtaposition that you see. I continued my walk onwards into Jaffa, also a very beautiful, culturally vibrant community, and then went on to the beach. So again, you see on the picture to the left, building all over Israel, building upwards. And then again, you see on the picture, Bring Them Home Now. And so people are just walking around, having a good time, walking around with their dogs. People in Israel like to walk around with their dogs very peacefully. And of course, Yom Kippur ended with the blowing of the shofar, and I am here outside of a synagogue. Then I took advantage of my stay in Israel, of course. I couldn't leave without visiting the beautiful city of Jerusalem. I took a train, and you see a lot of soldiers. My visit to Jerusalem was mostly personal. The pictures obviously are very beautiful of what it looks like, but I assure you that in reality, the old city of Jerusalem looks even far more spectacular than it does on any pictures that you may see. Such as this picture, which is actually the first picture that I took when I saw the Western Wall. And it's obviously a very important place for many people, and it is a very meaningful experience to go and visit. And then I left the old city. Again, the normality on the left, as you can see, this is in the old city. I'm eating just like anywhere else. And then what you also see, picture to the right, it's not always quite like anywhere else, because you also see border police. And so again, it's all normal until you see a lot of border guard police officers. And then another thing that had struck me is how diverse the people of Israel look. And that you can see even more clearly here. These are all pictures that I took. These are actually usually just snippets of background. And what I notice, and what I hope you will notice too, is how diverse the people of Israel are. I mean, just look at all these different faces. All these people look different. Their ethnicities are different. Their religions are different. And so even just judging from the pictures that I took, it seems to be quite incomprehensible for anybody to say that Israel would be a state that somehow exemplifies white supremacy. And then the next day, I went to Ben Gurion Airport, small hair battle. So apparently, if some people think there is something wrong with our hair, well, be my guest. And then I was back in New York. These are pictures that I took the day after I landed back in New York. Police presence and the fortified guards that are at Columbia University, an institute of higher learning in the United States of America. So, what are some of the lessons that I've learned from my experiences? First, what is October 7? October 7 is a mass atrocity of unprecedented savagery that was committed by the Islamic resistance movement Hamas, which is a genocidal organization. Ultimately, Hamas seeks to destroy democracy globally, and it relies on inhumane strategies to get this accomplished. Hamas, therefore, is a danger to all people Israel in the free world, and it is thereby motivated by a religiously justified extremist political ideology. What have I learned about Israel? First of all, Israel has existed since its creation in 1948. Somehow this has to be told today. And it still continues to evolve as a Jewish and democratic nation state. So on the one hand, Israel is ideologically divided and conflicted. However, on the other hand, the nation of the people of Israel is very rich in heritage and culture and is also very diverse in terms of the backgrounds of the people. What I have learned about New York, specifically, of course, the student protest, is that these protests have also involved harassment, violence, and criminality, and that it is generally completely lacking in rationality. The weak leadership of the university and academia in general has allowed anti-Zionism and Jew hatred on its campuses, also spilling over into the city and the neighborhood and indeed the country. What we have is a very loud but yet small minority of terrorism-supporting protesters, but it has met with all too little opposition, and I would say maybe even most problematically so, a very silent majority. Now, what is the context of these developments? So if we want to put this a little broader in a sociological framework, then I would say what we have here is a clash. We have a clash between two very different ideologies and two very different realities. On the one hand, we have an Al-Aqsa flood that was committed by Hamas, an act of terrorism because Hamas is a cult of death, and it represents a form of Islamism that is oriented at conquest. And indeed, where it is situated is in a Jew-free, Judenrein Muslim world, and it seeks to establish a global caliphate. On the other hand, what do we have in response to these developments on the part of Israel is obviously, in terms of October 7, an intelligence failure. There's no doubt about that. And we have the Israeli people who are the victims of Hamas, and the military, which is purely defensive, because Israeli society is built around a culture of life and a notion of Zionism that is established for peace. So in that sense, the threat from Hamas is existential. Israel has an obvious connection to Judaism, but it is a secular society, and the society is also pluralistic and wants to be established as one nation in a world of nations. Furthermore, more broadly sociological, the work of Emil Durkheim is important here. What we have is a juxtaposition of two very different societies. We have on the Hamas side a society that is traditional, repressive. The beliefs are backward, the technology is subordinated, and it seeks to establish a return to the past. Whereas on the Israeli side, we have a diverse, modern, liberal, forward-thinking society that is also technologically advanced, that is rooted in a history that is a living history, and that is also geared towards economic prosperity. Finally, there is an important academic context. And the context of academia is, on the one hand, there has been a decline of interest in counterterrorism, but there has also been a decline of interest and concern for anti-Semitism. And this, I think, is attributable to the influence of a vulgarized version of critical race theory that is basically a euphemism for a color-based bigotry. Zionism, therefore, is now suddenly completely falsely presented as a form of white colonialism, which really is simply factually incorrect and doesn't make any sense at all. Therefore, we now have this kind of stuff happening, is that you have a grotesque post that says that Israel does not have the right to exist. A post like this is being retweeted and accepted by academics and by people who are scholarly educated. This is absolutely grotesque. There is no other way to phrase it. These kind of statements are being posted and retweeted on X Twitter on October 7, 2023, the very day of the worst terrorist act against Israeli society. So finally, the issue here is not primarily a moral one, but an intellectual one that has moral implications. Because I would argue that there is a perverse inability and lack of courage to think that has led to these perspectives, these vulgarized race-based perspectives, which are fundamentally unscholarly, absolutist, and dogmatic. Therefore, we have a very uncritical form of thinking that leads to a praxis that is intolerant. And sadly, this is being institutionalized and legitimated these days in colleges, where we have such thing as Palestinian studies, Islamic world studies. Goodness me, here we have the caliphate being legitimated, and all of this, of course, is being promoted and popularized on social media. I would like to conclude by saying that this moral irresponsibility results indeed from a failure in intelligence. Anti-racism cannot be supported by any evidence. It doesn't make any sense from a scholarly point of view, and therefore anti-Zionism is wrong. And where are we today in January 2025? To some extent, the situation is still the same. We still have security at Columbia University. We still have posters. And we still attend the marches to bring home the hostages. And we don't yet know where this is going to lead at this particular time. If you are interested, there are further sources for my talk available online, so you can read some of my related work.